and welcome to episode 22 of That 60s Recording Podcast, conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. I hope you've all had a fantastic couple of weeks, had lots of great feedback for the Shall Tell Me episodes. He was such a pleasure to speak with, and having done that episode, I've connected with quite a few other people. Shell seems very keen to document sort of his stories on Facebook and that kind of stuff. And he's spoken to a few people who I have now spoken to. So there should be future episodes involving some of the people I've met as a result of having done that episode, if that makes any sense at all. Okay, so this week I'm speaking with an engineer and producer from London, and studio owner, called Simon Trought. Something I've done from the beginning of this podcast, if you're a new listener to this, is speak with people who perhaps weren't obviously involved in 60s recording, but have a mentality that is particular to 60s recording, if that makes any sense. So, we're not talking about adjusting stuff in your Logic or Pro Tools, your DAW, or auto tuning. It's all an attitude about getting stuff right on the way in and having a particular feel in what you're recording. And I think that it's still really interesting. It's certainly interesting for me to have conversations with these people, and I hope that you enjoy listening to them, and I hope that goes some way to explaining why I have these people on. I love talking, especially about the Beatles, with a lot of with anyone basically. And I think that although we've got a lot of technology available to us, I think that it's more important now than ever to have a particular mindset. And as much as it's really interesting, obviously, and a real honour to speak with guys who were actually around in the 60s, I find it equally interesting to speak with people who are influenced a lot by 60s music, and 70s. Obviously, it's not quite as easy to pigeonhole into the, just purely the 60s, because everything seems to evolve right through to sort of mid to slightly late 70s as well. So anyway, I'll quit rabbiting and get on. So Simon Trought, absolutely lovely guy, owner of Soup Studios, and we discuss boats and his tape machines and pitfalls of recording on a boat. So here we go. Enjoy, Simon Trought. Okay, so I'm really pleased to be joined on the phone by Simon Trought, who is the founder of Soup Studios in London, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a ridiculously cool studio that we'll talk about more of this in a second, but it is on a boat. So that just to wet your whistle about what's coming. But yeah, thanks so much for coming to chat to me, Simon. I appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you for asking. Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, the first thing I want to address is the fact that you have a studio on a boat.
Yeah. It's quite. I guess it's a ship. Rather than a boat. Probably think of a little barge or something, but it's an enormous big red ship just moored up just on the bottom of the River Lee, just as it joins the Thames down in East London.
Does it move at all, or is it just static?
No, the last time it moved was when there's no engine in it anymore. But the last time it moved was a few years ago when the boat owner got married, and he got a tugboat to tow the boat up the Thames to a sweet spot, and they kind of got married there, and and then towed it back. So it comes up and down with the tide. During the tide cycle, you're up, depending on where the moon is, obviously, but you're sometimes up bobbing around on the tide for a good 3-4 hours of a tide cycle.
Are you quite aware of when you're recording that you're on a moving sort of thing?
Yeah, it's all weather dependent, totally.
Oh wow.
And I mean, if the river's busy and the wind's up and there's you can be really, really swaying around. You can be kind of you know, at its worst or best, depending on how you look at it. You know, you're looking out of the porthole. There's a series of portholes just in front of the console in the control room, and you're staring against the kind of dock wall, as it were.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can be seeing those bricks move up and down, you know, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet, you know, like quite, you know, and kind of sudden jerks against the ropes if there's like I say, busy river traffic.
That's
going
crazy.
past in the summer, yeah. So it gets quite nuts. But I mean, to be honest, it's been really quiet. You know, this last year, the river's been quiet. So it's yeah, we've not had the really scary ups and downs. You do get used to it, and you still have to remind yourself, because a lot of people come to record there for the first time, and you have to remember back to those first few weeks when we first moved on there, and how exciting and shocking at the same time it was that we're floating around in this, you know, 500-ton metal ship, you know, with all your gear on there and all the mics on stands and everything. And
that's a point. Is it sort of because I was trying to rack my brains about. I know when we spoke in last week in sort of the run up to this conversation, you mentioned that there's pros and cons about the boat, and I was trying to rack my brains about what kind of pros and cons there would be, and everything you've mentioned so far is not something I thought of. But is there like an inertia in the boat? Is that the right word? Is it like a vacuum in the sense that nothing falls over when the boat moves, or do you get mics and stuff falling over?
Never had it. Never had anything fall over, but it's more. we have a lot of weights hanging around. It's more that, you know, your mic stand. If we've got a few that are on wheels, you know, if you're not careful and you don't wedge them properly, you know, they'll be sliding, you know, slowly crawling across the room. Yeah. So when the boat's parked, when the tide's out, you're on the bottom, and it doesn't always land level. It lands in a different place every time, and sometimes you land and you're on a list, just a slight one, but it's always the way the studio's positioned. So when you're sat at the control desk on your kind of, you know, producer's chair on wheels, you have to kind of hook your knees underneath the mixing console so that otherwise you just kind of start moving backwards, you know, towards the sofa. So
wow, I absolutely love it. It's so interesting.
yeah. It's all just fun. It's fun stuff. And the history of the boat is amazing. It's really, you know, I'm proud to be, you know, part of the story, a little part of it, of the story of the boat, you know.
So how long have you been sort of resident in it?
I'm pretty sure it'll be 3 years.
Okay, so it's still fairly
about
recent.
3 years. Yeah.
And you mentioned the history of the boat. What is the history of the boat?
It was a light ship. There was quite a few of them stationed around the UK. For quite, I'm guessing it was kind of turn of the century, you know. There's lots of areas where you can't get a lighthouse, you know. There's lots of shifting sands and different kind of hairy places for ships. And yeah, there was about 200 of these big red light ships, but a floating lighthouse, basically a manned floating lighthouse that was stationed around the UK. This one that we're on, Lightship 95, that was down on the Goodwin Sands. One of maybe 4 that would patrol around there. Okay. And, you know, keep stray ships from you know, coming a cropper on the shifting sands down there.
Cool.
So,
do you know how old it is?
I did, and I've forgotten. I can't remember. But, yeah, but like I say, it's some. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's kind of maybe turn of the century, pre-First World War, maybe something like that.
Oh wow, so
Not
quite
sure.
significantly old.
There's quite a few photos that the boat owners found of that boat, and also the similar ones. And there's, you know, they look like proper old Victorian salty sea dogs. These dudes that were manning these ships. Yeah. Oh
wow, very cool.
Yeah, and then just the whole story of you know, of Ben, who kind of, it was a bit of a rusty hulk, you know, decommissioned. He found it, had the brainwave to make it into a studio, and there's a whole story on YouTube of how he renovated it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's all sorts of interesting stuff on it that from when he took the project on. Yeah,
Oh,
and he ran it as a studio for a few years until he went on to do other stuff. So it's just nice to be part of its story, really. Just a little bit.
Yeah, it's very cool, and it makes it.
Yeah.
Something I have found is that a lot of studios seem to be sort of located in places that you wouldn't expect to find a studio. Before you're a studio owner, you kind of imagine that your studio is going to be in some perfect location with perfect walls and perfect this, and it's going to be completely soundproofed.
Perfect access and storage.
And then the reality is, when it comes down to paying rent, you end up in, my story is nowhere near as good as yours, but I'm in the living room of an old flat above a brass band social club. And
I love it though.
It's exactly that kind of thing. And you once you sort of let go of your sort of a naive idealism, you realise that it's actually quite a cool, inspiring place to be. And I can imagine that's exactly how it is on the boat. It must be an inspiring place to be working.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, like I say, once you get down to the nitty gritty, you kind of could be anywhere as well. Once you're kind of over the fun of getting on the boat and getting set up and everything, not everyone's there just to wallow in the heritage of the boat. Yeah, they've come to make music, and they've come to Soup Studio to, get some groovy shit down. So
yeah, well, of course, and that's brought
you forget about it, and then the tide comes up, and then suddenly you're reminded, that you're on the boat. So,
well, that's
I mean, it's just it's it's difficult. If it's wet, getting on the boat, getting off can be difficult. It's just it's kind of drawbridges and a kind of steep laddery stair thing, access down to the control room and live room, and there's lots of cons to it, but the pros far outweigh them, to be honest. And like I said, I've never had this dream studio. In all the spaces that Soup's been in, they're always compromised, unless you're unless you've got some big amazing self-built studio somewhere in the countryside. It's just always going to be compromised, so but you just get used to it. And
it's what makes it fun, isn't it? The way
totally.
that you work around those compromises.
Totally.
You kind of brought me nicely onto the point. I didn't want to speak to you because your studio's in a boat. So I'll put a bit of context that we sort of loosely know each other, I suppose, from Instagram. And you just get an instinctive feeling, or I get an instinctive feeling, that when you look at Instagram, is obviously a shop window. It's not, it's not, social media is not ideal, but I knew straight away from looking at what you're doing that you were somebody who would be of interest to me. I wasn't thinking sort of podcast wise or anything. I was just thinking music wise, what you're doing looks to be something that I affiliate with almost. And then the more I dug into it, the more I realised that your approach to recording must be influenced by the sorts of things I'm interested in, which is sort of 60s-y analog style recording. And then when we chatted the other week, it turns out you're a huge Beatles fan, which is always a win for me. And so there, just for the listeners who have listened to us talk about a boat for for 10 minutes, now have at least some perspective on why you're here. And I think it's going to be really interesting to dig into the way that you approach things. I mean, I've been listening through to some of the recordings you've made that you put on the website, and there's something really special about all of them, and I'm excited to speak to you about how you approach those.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So before we do that, I'd love it if you could tell me a bit about your journey to. So you mentioned Soup Studios as almost like a standalone thing. It wasn't born to be put on the boat. It was a thing before that. And so how long have you sort of run Soup Studios?
Well, it's around 20 years now. Those 20 years have gone by pretty quick. But yeah, it started. I was in a band, and we'd recorded a few records here and there And it got to, I'd always been into recording from a kid. I'd inherited a Tascam 4-track when I was really young, and was always prattling around making stuff. And we were, I was in this kind of cool DIY band that kind of started going places we didn't mean to. It was a kind of accidental bedroom project that kind of got out of hand, but when it came to do, I think it was the third record or something like that. Yeah, we I got to the point where I was so interested in record. I'd be the guy in the band who at the studios was just annoying the engineer or producer, sat right next to him for the whole session, trying to get my hands on everything and just soaking up how you do all this in a bigger, capacity to just working with a little 4-track tape machine. So the hunger there was for me and the band to record this album ourselves. So we ended up, asking the record label, instead of the money to go into a studio to record, if we could take the money and rent some space somewhere for a while and buy a little bit of gear and give it a go ourselves. And they were, probably not that happy to oblige, because it wasn't a commercial success, that record. but it's what it's what got me going, really. And I couldn't, when the album was finished, after 3 or 4 months or something, that was the deal, was, well, we'll give this space up, and just kind of get on with stuff. But I was so attached to it, and even by that time, I'd started to record other bands on the label, and just suddenly, it was a viable thing to do, to just kind of keep it going and try and get bands in and bits of work and pay the rent. And it was just started from there, really.
So by the time you had asked to record that third album yourself, you'd already had a reasonable amount of experience. Was it practical experience, or just the experience of recording 2 albums in the studio?
Yeah, I mean, just I was obviously focusing hard on playing the guitar, and we were making this music and everything. But whenever I wasn't playing, I was totally nerding out, probably with a vision of something, to be able to just somehow do this as a job or something, or just be able to keep recording. So
you must have had a level of confidence in your ability to sort of want to do it yourself. I mean, I can remember just being scared shitless about doing recording, because you don't know what you're doing, and you're scared of making mistakes. But where was your head at?
I totally agree. But luckily, the type of music that I'm into and was recording was quite lo-fi music. I was obsessed with Tape Op magazine back then, and just all the kind of funky, cheap ways you can record that aren't high. I was quite anti-hi-fi, anti-commercial recording. So, the more bizarre it sounded sometimes was better, and that was just because you were, like you say, making mistakes and just learning as you went along, really.
I think that's really cool. I think it's really brave to want to do it. And do you remember what gear you bought?
Yeah, well, the first thing was an M box. I've still got it, actually. I'm looking at it now. It's on my shelf down in my room. But which was a marvel for me. I'd never worked on a computer before that. It had always been tape machines, and this was the only way we could do it with the little bit of money we got to kind of self-fund the record was buying an M box, and nicked a laptop from the Singers College where he worked and stuff like that. And so just had a really basic Pro Tools setup. It hadn't been out that long, I don't think, at the time, and just. It was quite good, because they've only got 2 ins, and it was a 1-room space. So you're in there with the band, with the doing everything in the same room. Pop some headphones on when you track it. So I got to learn how to record drums with 2 mics. I didn't even have then a mixer to submix some mics in, and then just take the stereo channel into the DAW, as they call it. So that was quite interesting. And then after a little while, I got hold of a Fostex E16 little, I think they're like quarter-inch, half-inch reel-to-reels. Mm-hmm. So that produced quite a conundrum, because I'd fill up the tape, and record albums and stuff on there, and then I had a real like cack-handed way of getting them onto the computer so that I could mix them and finish them off on the computer. So, you know, like luckily learning how to get a good sound out of 2 channels on the drums was essential, because I could only take 2 channels down at a time. So, you know, I'd take the drums across, like, and there was a band I was working with who were kind of, it was like Sonic Youth-y Pavement, kind of like really long, kind of heavy guitar solos and stuff, really cool stuff.
Yeah.
But after, you know, some of the songs were 7 or 8 minutes long, and, you know, after 3 or 4 minutes of recording 2 tracks at a time onto the computer, you know, you've gone out of sync by like half a second, you know, a second, you know. So apart from the drums, which you'd transfer back to digital first, everything else afterwards had to be, you know, incrementally chopped up and nudged, you know, and then all put back to, you know, into one piece, you know, after you dumped it all back down. So, you know, just really crude method, but it worked. I got the joy of being able to record, you know, lots of stuff on a tape machine and keep that thing going, but then the joy of, you know, mixing and prattling around on the computer afterwards. So yeah,
that's very cool. I'm really interested. This is a selfish question, but do you remember how you mic'd the drums up with 2 mics?
Yeah, I do. I think I'd managed to get with that M box. I think we'd got a couple of, I can't remember the brand now when they came out, but some kind of, you know, Chinesey kind of brand where it was like a copy, not a Valve, but a copy of a kind of 87 type of thing, you know, a big condenser mic. You know, you went through loads of them because you drop them and they just shatter to pieces. But yeah, I just popped one down, you know, in about 2 meters away from the kick, you know, on the, you know, towards the floor tom, you know, that kind of end of the kick drum. Mm-hmm. And then another one just coming straight in from the side to pointing at the snare. This is before I'd even nerded out enough to know about, you know, kind of Glyn Johns technique or anything of having that kind of set. It was a version of the Glyn Johns technique, I suppose, where, you know, you'd lose a bit of definition here and there on a, you know, on some toms and whatnot, on some cymbal focus, but it was good enough, you know, for what we were doing to have a picture of a drum kit that was convincing and felt good. Yeah, I
think so much of a drum sound is the drummer themselves, and if they're getting a good balance.
That's the thing. I mean, most, you know, surely 90% of the drum sound is the drummer, the kit, and how it's tuned, and the space it's in. You know, that is probably, you know, if I just stuck 157 pointing at it. So, you know, even back then there were some really good musicians knocking around who I was recording.
Yeah.
Luckily, they didn't mind, you know, being recorded in such a kind of slack-handed, kind of lo-fi way. But when someone plays a kit really well, it just sounds good. Whatever you put up, you know, it's hard not to make it sound good if it's tuned well and is played well. So,
I find it I just find it really interesting that you were forced into recording that way, and I love that. I mean, it makes me laugh that I send out sort of 13, 14 tracks worth of stems when I send you know, my stuff off, and that's what, you know, if the isolated drum stuff I've done, that if you the sort of stereo mix or mono mix that I do is just one overhead and then the 2 room mics and an outside kick mic, and that's it, and then I put all of the other ones there just so that people can mess about with it. But I think that if I could have it my way, I just have one overhead, and I just have that one overhead, one kick drum, and 2 rooms, and that's it. Or even just, you know, the 2 rooms sound great, exactly like you've just described. You know, I love that sound, and I wish it takes a lot of confidence for people to commit to that sound.
It does. You know, you need a lot of bravery to commit to stuff like that. And like I say, you're working in a professional capacity the same as I am, you know, with clients who they might even just use the kind of 3 groovy mics and not bother with all the other stuff. But you have to give people the options, you know.
Absolutely.
You have to cover your back and let them make the choices.
Yeah, for sure. So how just sort of gear wise, how did you graduate from where you were to
well, I mean, perhaps you could tell us sort of how you got from there to where you are at the studio now, and what gear you've got there that you're currently using.
Yeah, it was slow. I never had any kind of money or investment to kind of, just get a load of stuff. It was just, I mean, back then you still could pick up bits of gear, good gear, fairly cheaply. So I would just, what did I started, buying an 87, a kind of Drama 1960 dual valve thing, a DBX over easy compressor. Kind of managed to buy one of those type of things, every year or something, or every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Now they cost a fortune, but back then, it was like, £500-600 for that stereo, Drama unit, and the DBX was like 400 quid, probably like £2,000 now, something. So, like, it was expensive, but still affordable. And I'd just, pile it on a credit card, and then when I'd made some money outside of the studio, I'd kind of pay the credit card off, But so slowly built it up, and over the year, like more recently, because it's not just me running Soup now, but there's 3 other engineers that work there who I've kind of collected along the way, and they all had little bits of gear from their project studios or this or that or previous studios. So beg, borrow and steal, really. Every time I moved studio, I'd probably find that bit of extra money just to like get a slightly better tape machine, upgraded that E16, that Fostex, to a Tascam. I can't remember what it was called now, but that was a really groovy 1-inch 16 track. It had Dolby on or off on every channel as well. You could select on every channel if you wanted the old Dolby on there. So that was really cool, and it adds really good tapey sound. You could really push that into distortion, a really, really lovely distortion. Like the Atari that we've got now, it's just a really good. If you try and push too much into that, even if you're using the thinner tape, it just doesn't sound that good.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of goes into a kind of harsh kind of sound rather than silken and velvety.
Yeah.
So just I think another engineer, Sam, who works there, he picked up the Atari MTR-90, found it on eBay, and it did belong to Manfred Mann, apparently, a member of Manfred Mann. It's kind of weird at that time. Like, you'd look on eBay and like loads of stuff seemed to have belonged to Manfred Mann. It was always in the listing, ex Manfred Mann, this or that, and it was true. Yeah, he spoke to the guy's wife who was selling it. It was a kind of part of a kind of estate sale type of thing. So it had a bit of history, but. I really like that. That's a really solid tape machine. Like I said, not to do anything really super weird on it. It's just really a really good, accurate, but with the bump of the tape, because we run a kind of a homemade clasp kind of setup at the studio where we, you can literally get everything on the board, all going to digital. Get your whole mix up, get everything sounding good, and you can literally hit play and record on the tape machine and buff, then you're listening straight back off the repro head, and you just, wow, the whole thing just lifts. You just get this kind of boost of energy, all the mics sound suddenly better, because they're all just pushed in a little bit and saturated. So that's really, really pleasing to use that machine. It's lucky to still be alive, actually. It's blown up twice, that thing, just through unfortunate circumstances. In the last studio, before we moved on the boat, we'd built this really nice place. It was absolute pride of joy. We kind of moved on because the lease was kind of not really happening. It was going to be developed and whatnot, so we moved on. But we'd built this even to the point of having a really nice tape machine room with sliding doors, so you could constantly monitor the tape VU levels and the tape, but from the control desk. But it was totally silent, wasn't in the room, vented. But up above it was a shower block, which just leaked one day and just came down all over the tape machine and blew that up. Luckily, got that fixed somehow. The damage wasn't as bad. It was just lots of God knows what they do. But he got it going again, and it was fine. And then it again, only about 2 years ago on the boat, just a simple thing. We'd stupidly plugged in like a lamp, just a little lamp that we used to, to see where you put in the bantams in the patch bay. And someone's chair leg just kind of went on this, just shorted out this lamp, and we'd plug the lamp into, the same plug as the tape machine, and we hadn't isolated it with breakers and stuff, and that absolutely fried the tape machine. We're still now repairing it. It fried the remote control. It just loads of channels. Just we can't get them back even after hours and lots of expensive engineers trying to come and fix it. So we're running that at like 20 channels at the moment rather than the 24. But so it's still going strong, but it's But it's had quite a few knockarounds, that one.
Yeah, sounds it. The picture that you paint of using the tape machine through the desk, it makes made my hair stand on end. I want to come and see it and listen to it. It just sounds amazing.
It's amazing. I guess all like technically, there's just that kind of bottom end boost. A little bit of softening on the highs, but also pushing into that softening, a saturation, and it just smooths out all those peaks, and it just really it's hard to explain it, but it is. You're right, it's quite magical when you just hit record, and just listen to it all coming through the tape.
Is it something you're using? Regularly, do you use it as a matter of course, or do you get requested to people asked to use it?
No, I try. If it's projects that are bands that I record a fair few times, and and they understand it takes a little longer to record to tape, I use it as much as possible. In recent times, it's just been a bit stressful. At the moment, this last year, people have just been running in and out when they can during lockdowns to get bits done, and we're not in the zone to be kind of chilling out and really nerding out on the tape machine. So, not been in use as much recently. But before that, I would kind of insist on it for a lot of sessions. I just preferred the sound. It's less work afterwards. If you go onto the tape, there's less faffing about getting rid of weird frequencies and spikiness and trying to. You start overusing plugins because you haven't got what you wanted from the tape. So, and it's just what was I going to say? It's like that. You understand why they would have a tape op back in the day.
Yes.
It's constantly running around all day. You've got 15 minutes on high speed. You've got to time the band's takes so you can rewind the tape and go over it again and capture that. And there's always channels popping in and out. Even when it's fully functioning, it's just a big analog beast. And a needle stick. You have to go and tap it to make sure you're not, you're still in the sweet spot on everything. So it's quite, it's a physical job. If you just running a session on your own without an intern or another engineer, it's just a lot to manage all in one go when you're trying to keep an eye on the music, you're producing it, you're doing this, blah, 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 and manning this big beast of a tape machine. So not been using it as much, but do enjoy it when the time's right. There's been albums before where I've just insisted on every last little BV or tambourine. No, we've got to do it through the tape, So I've kind of chilled out now. You understand that sometimes it's just getting that meat and veg down, the live drums and bass and that bit of stuff in the booth, the guitar or something. Once you get that down, just going digitally over the top is fine, and it kind of sometimes suits it as well.
Oh, interesting.
To hybrid the two. I'm not a super tape nerd that just has to stay on it religiously, and I just love working on the computer solely as well. It's got a different flavour as well, which is relevant for other music. I don't know. It's a commercial studio soup, and we don't just record, lo-fi, grungy guitar bands and stuff. There's all sorts of stuff in, so you get the joy of going through really clean Focusrite pre's straight to high-end digital back end. and just hearing this openness and this clarity, from not using the tape. So it's just good to have both, really, and you choose the projects that you think are going to really enjoy working with the tape.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how many bands come in and like, what's that?
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. Just never seen one before. Never even kind of real, I guess a young kid these days, why would they, if you weren't into the historical, the historics of recording, and you've just grown up with recording on computers and stuff, why would you ever think it was any different? And it's quite a shock to say, what, you record on that? How does that work? Sign of getting a bit older, but it's
interesting. I think that I think when you're proficient at something, as a musician, I think it's important to understand the background through it. I studied jazz when I was at college, and as part of studying jazz, you have to study the history of jazz. And even though I don't go out and play trad jazz, but having a good understanding of trad, what a drummer's role in the early 1900s was, arguably that set me up really well for sort of a career idolizing Ringo, because that's that's essentially what his job is, just slightly more glorified. And I think that recording wise, I think it's important, especially now that there's a bit of a resurgence about sort of analog recording and using tape, and understanding the merits in the process. I think it's quite important that some of the sort of younger generations start to understand. And I think it's really good that you're still actively attempting to use a tape machine when you can, and sort of hopefully educating a few people that didn't know what it was and what the benefits were, and how important it is to it's the process of it, isn't it? Musicianship has to be high. You've got to make choices, and you've got to do all the things that tape makes you do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's bands that come in and they've come to Soup because we have a tape machine, and they haven't used one before, and it's not always because of the myth of how good it's going to sound or how different or whatever. Sometimes they've just read about exactly what you said. It was it's a nod. They'd like to record with a little nod to how it used to be done, where they'll sit and rehearse the part longer. You'll nail your shit better before getting it down. And that people like ways of putting the pressure on themselves to record when they're recording, to try and push themselves a little further. And the tape really shines on those kind of bands, the jazz bands, the kind of people who are just amazing at improvising and amazing players, because they're not expecting to stop. Can you rewind that? Can we do that bit again? Drop me in here, blah, blah, blah. It's the real, technical musical talent, that really, really shine when you use tape, because it's designed for a really well rehearsed band to get some stuff down. It's too clunky and slow and annoying if you just want to quickly get stuff down, or you're just used to at home, like putting something on loop and recording it, until you've got the right take and then move on.
That's it. I'm thinking about one of the tracks that you've got up on the website. I think you've just called it The Soul Band, but it's got a proper like Al Green sort of vintage, like what would Al Green be, sort of early 70s or mid 70s or something. I just love it. You've nailed that sound, and I'm assuming that those guys are the sort of guys that you're talking about.
That was a kind of collection of friends from 2 or 3 bands who were all in that kind of vein anyway. It's just a bit of a mad get together, but I mean, like I say, if you mute the vocal on that track, because Reed the singer was in the middle of the room singing, slightly baffled off, but not loads, but just belted into that mic, that it doesn't sound like a great recording when you mute the vocal. It's all about that spill on his vocal mic that gives it that 3D depth, I think. And there's only a certain amount of, singers who can sing live really well in a situation like that. we did a few takes, obviously, but
Yeah.
I don't think that was even one we chopped together. They rehearsed it a few times, and everyone perks up and really, really focuses when you've made the situation quite tight like that. That okay, this guy's singing his heart out. Yeah, I'm not going to miss a beat on these drums. I'm not going to fluff this guitar. It forces you to like maybe even play a bit simpler, which is better because that complements the song usually, rather than knowing that you can redo it or you can mute this and do it again, or people maybe overplay sometimes, but forcing a situation like that where this singer's singing his heart out, and if you don't back him up properly, then it's
it's a really great point. And if there's spill coming through on the on the vocal mic, you can't chop in the drums from another take because it won't
exactly
sit right.
Yeah, exactly. Is that you can't do any messing about at all. If you try and like nudge one bit of something, even if it's just like because the kick drum on that session was just this the big old RCA B44, whatever it is, just down near the kick drum somewhere. So obviously it's just picking up all the room and everything, and probably even the spill from his vocal. If there's one dodgy kick drum just slightly out and you nudge it, suddenly you've got this little weird flammy phasey thing going on that's really noticeable. So yeah, it
reminds me of a conversation I had with an engineer a producer in LA called Clay Blair, who's it's called Boulevard Recording, and I can't remember what the studio was. It was Hollywood recording studio or something, and he was talking about the spill on Beatles recordings through the vocal mic was essentially the sound of a lot of Beatles recordings, and you've just said exactly the same thing. I think that and then from what you said just after that, it made me think that you're by setting a situation up like that, you're creating an environment where everybody who's playing feels like the moment's special. And when you're playing an individual part on your own, like in a booth, and the rest of the band sat in the control room listening to like the drummer play along to some scratch guide track that someone's put down, and that's pretty uninspiring because they just threw it down. There's not really a
there's no comparison there, is there?
No, and you get on the talk back and it's that was good, should we just do another one? And you're just going through the motions, and then it's can you just do another one and try changing the fills up a little bit? And where's it's the complete antithesis of what you've just said, which is like everyone's tingling because if they get this wrong, everyone's gonna have to do it all again, and the tape's running, and it's expensive, and it's time consuming to go back. And
that's true. That's quite funny on that tape machine that Sam bought from the Manfred Mann estate. Someone had put on a pound sign sticker on the counter, the digital counter, and it's actually quite accurate. So when you've got when you've done 30 minutes, it's like 300, looks like £300 or something. It's like, well, that's kind of about right. Do you know what I mean? But back then it's more expensive now, but yeah.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, but there's nothing like a bit of pressure, to get people to, you don't have to go the Phil Spector shotgun route, do you, to get people to perform.
That's very timely at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
There we have it. The first part of my conversation with Simon Trought. I hope that you enjoyed it. I spoke to Simon at length before we recorded the episode. We talked for like an hour on the phone. Just talking, basically we just both talking about how much we love the Beatles. He's such a lovely guy. So in 2 weeks' time, there will be another episode, the second half of that conversation. And then, as I've alluded to in my introduction, I've got a lot of exciting episodes coming up after that. So yes, it just leaves me to say a huge thank you to my good friend Joe Kane for the intro and outro music he made for this, and to my friend David Henshaw for the lovely artwork he supplies. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me if you have any episode suggestions, people I should speak to. I always get back to everybody who gets in touch with me, and I always look into suggestions. Sometimes they're not feasible, but I always look into them. So my email address is joe@allyouneedisdrums.com, and my website's allyouneedisdrums.com, so you can get in touch through there. You can find me on Instagram @allyouneedisdrums. Okay, so I will see you again in 2 weeks' time. All right, goodbye.